Finally, I think all of this adds up to this idea of value. You get the best value. People sometimes ask us when we're in presentations, well, you know, how do we know it's going to be the lowest price? And we say, well, that's not what it's about. You have a budget. Use the budget to its best advantage and get the best value. So, as you can tell, we're strongly promoters, strongly promote that. I think it's a good idea. Okay, here it comes. Budgets are funny things. You know, sometimes people say, oh, I don't have enough money to do X or to do Y. And we usually say, you know what, with any budget, you can get something of quality done. Right? So that said, we have identified, you know, through experience, and we read a lot about what's going on out in the industry to make sure that, you know, our costs stay in line with that. And these are industry-wide figures. The numbers I'm showing you here are in US dollars. And we've done that because we understand that there are people from different islands and different countries here, and we're trying to find a common way to do that. So we hope that that's at least something that everyone can get back to kind of quickly. So you remember before there were the 4 exhibit types along the bottom of the screen. Okay, again, from simpler and then less expensive down to more involved and more expensive. You can see per square foot how that changes. And at an early part of a project, when you're just starting, you don't know really anything except it's going to be about the archaeological history of Aruba. It's easiest to think about it in terms of square feet, right? Because you don't know you're going to have a Milwaukee exhibit yet, how expensive that's going to be. It's a very general process. So you say, all right, well, this museum is going to be 6,800 square feet. We'll budget it at $200 a square foot, multiply it out, and that's your exhibit budget. A little more thinking than that goes into it, but that's kind of the basis of it. So it's often actually a blend, of course. You don't have all integrated environments. You don't have all interactives. And I'll show you how that blend can work in a moment. Any questions about that before I move off this slide? Okay, so we're doing this kind of museum. What do we budget? That's what we say. And that's for all of the phases that we showed you. Planning, design, fabrication, installation. Opening day for all the exhibits. Not for the building, remember, the exhibits. There's a couple of exceptions to that. One is smaller exhibitions. Once you get down to a small size, and as a rule of thumb, 2,000 square feet, it doesn't work too well because then it becomes very specific. If you were doing an exhibit the size of this room, what that exhibit specifically is will greatly affect that number. It can skew it way high or way low. But if you're looking at the entire museum, there's an averaging that happens. And we can pretty confidently say that, okay, for that range of cost, we can do a museum of quality. The other exception is if you have very large artifacts, if you're exhibiting airplanes or automobiles or something like that, they take up a lot of space. So that drives that cost per square foot down considerably. Questions on that? So the budgeting is not only driven by what kind of experiences you're going to have, but it also has an effect on what's going to happen. The level of interactivity, you saw that again in the different styles that were going on. You know, what's the sophistication and the finish? And that's an interesting thing too, because it doesn't necessarily mean that to have a sophisticated exhibit that looks really sharp, you have to be on the end of that budget line that we showed you. This museum falls down toward the lower end of the spectrum of the budgets that we showed you. And I think you would agree that it's a fairly sophisticated looking exhibit with some nice finishes. But that is definitely affected by the budget. How much media is in the exhibit, and the density, how much is in there. You know, that also is affected by and affects the budget. Another way to look at budget is, well, what does it buy? How do you divide up the pie? And so we look at three major sections: planning and design, fabrication and installation. And that is typically how we would divide this up in this part of the world. So that's about what you're going to look at. You know, it's going to vary by institution, by specific experience, but that's a pretty good rule of thumb. The good news about that is there's the big number, right? But this takes the first 2/3 of the project. So your startup, your beginning that project is a small part of the pie. And it's not entirely uncommon to start this while you're still fundraising for this. That's also possible. There's 3 different ways to get that done. Yes, sir.
The slide before this, where were those pictures taken? I couldn't read them.
Okay.
Is that your work?
Yes, this is taken at Shalom Street. It's an interactive museum of Jewish life at the Jewish Community Center in Detroit, Michigan. This slide is the Cole Children's Museum, which is in Glenview, Illinois. It's a suburb of Chicago, Illinois. Okay. All right, so whatever the budget you have is, how do you use that to your best advantage? Maybe that's the crux of the whole budget conversation. One, as you'll see when we walk around, is to spend the money strategically. That means rather than saying, well, we're gonna take this and spread the money over the whole gallery and spend it evenly so everything has the same amount of money applied to it, we kind of pile it up in strategic places and say, we're gonna spend some money on this experience, this one, this one. So that gives you a point of focus as a visitor. Again, it goes back to that rhythm, to creating a changing experience, and it allows you to take what might otherwise be kind of flat or the same, and really create some memorable experiences in there without a huge budget. So that's a really important way to do it. The simple activities, again, you'll see some of these out here, and as Maria said before, not every interactive is expensive. Sometimes those two things are equated, and they really don't need to be. There's some very simple, low-tech things that you can do to engage people physically, mentally in the exhibits. So that's an important way to do that. Programming, which is more of an ongoing thing. That's typically what your educators are doing. Bringing, there were children in here Sunday.
Yes.
They're doing a wonderful program. They were all having a lot of fun. Susie, the educator here, was doing that. And that will be ongoing. That's something that happens in the exhibits. You use the exhibits to enhance the programming and vice versa. So that's a very important thing. The effective design is something I've talked about all the way through here in terms of using your budget well. It's using that budget smartly to create varied experience for the visitor. And finally here, along with varied, you also want to have rotating exhibits. We'll show you out there some places where the exhibits can change over time, so that it's not all of these same exhibits. Like we'll see that again. You want to bring visitors back. So there are a number of ways to do that, and changing exhibits as well.